You're watching HuffPost Live. I'm Marc Lamont Hill. Get ready, America, for Jeb Bush 2016. W's little brother is officially a presidential candidate. After tweeting earlier this week, I am excited to announce I will actively explore the possibility of running for president of the United States. There's a distinct possibility we see Bush square off against Hillary Clinton, which would look an awful lot like 1992, except for this Clinton being a woman, of course. So what do we make of the Bushes and the Clintons? Are political dynasties, which they are, good for America? Joining me to answer that question is presidential historian David Eisenbach. We're also joined by Jeannie Zaino, professor at both NYU and Iona College. She works way too hard. And political historian Nicole Hemmer. David, I'll start with you. Political families have always been a part of America.
That is true. That is true. We had the Adamses in the 19th century, the Roosevelts, of course, even the Harrisons. So they have been around.
Yeah.
That's true.
But something seems unique about this moment.
Well, the fact that you have two sort of colliding at the same time is the unique thing. Although I do have a kind of a problem with calling the Clintons a dynasty. I mean, she built that along with him. I mean, she, with blood, sweat, and tears, kept him online all those years, and that wasn't easy. So in comparison to the Bushes, right, where Prescott Bush, the grandfather, was this major kingmaker of the Republican Party, golfing partner with Dwight David Eisenhower. So they've been in the American political powerhouse for a very long time, the Bushes.
If you're under 38 years old, and I guess I'll go to the rest of the crew here, but actually let me get your sense about one more thing of this before I move on.
Yeah.
Because if you're under 38, you know, and you think about presidential elections that you've seen, I'm looking here. You've experienced you've only experienced one national election in which there wasn't a Bush or a Clinton running.
Yeah.
Has this generation of voters accepted that dynasties are just an immutable part of American political life?
Well, I guess. I mean, if this is how you've grown up and you've only seen these families, but like I said, you know, there's nothing in comparison to the Clintons who actually built their situation and the Bushes who were born on third base and thought they hit a triple.
Absolutely. Nicole, what's the danger of this kind of reality?
Well, I think there are a couple of dangers to it. One of them is that, you know, we're in this era of where people feel like they're less socially mobile. And you look at the presidency, which is a pretty symbolic office, and you see these two families who, and granted, I take David's point that Hillary Clinton didn't inherit politics in the same way that the Bushes did. But if you look at these two candidates, Bush and Clinton, whose road to the White House winds through the White House itself, I think that diminishes the idea of a democratic or meritocratic system in which anyone really can be president.
Absolutely. Jeannie, can you give me a sense of how this happens? I understand the Prescott Bush thing. I understand that the Clintons sort of entered the scene now, or not now, but in 92 on the presidential scene. When this stuff kind of happens, some of it is great strategy, some of it is natural talent, but what other kinds of political conditions must be in place to allow for a dynasty to persist? We could have just had one Bush. We could have just had Bill Clinton. How does this happen?
Well, you know, I think this really speaks to, while we've had political dynasties going back throughout American history and you know, the Adams were mentioned, I think this really speaks to a huge problem in our politics today, and that has to do with the role of money in politics. Why are Hillary Clinton and Jeb Bush number one in the polls at this point? Because they can raise the $1.5 billion it is going to take to run successfully in 2016 for president. Now, you'll have a few other people out here, many of them also legacies. I mean, you look at somebody like Rand Paul. He didn't come out of nowhere. His father, you know, so you can look at Mary Landrieu. By my count, in 2014, we had over 20 legacies running for office. And a lot of it has to do with name recognition and money. You can raise the money. Why did Jeb Bush come out the other day? He knows he has to raise a lot of money, and he wanted those big-time fundraisers not to go to Mitt Romney, not to go to Chris Christie, but to come to him. So while I do think there is an idea that, you know, police officers tend to have police officers as children and teachers have teachers, there's also something really scary about what's going on here, and that has to do with the role of money in our system, which badly needs to be addressed.
Is money always the issue when we have political dynasties? For example, if I look at the Roosevelts,
right?
Is money the reason why we end up, David, with multiple presidencies?
Well, money is now much more important today, right? And I think that with having the name, the Clinton name, the Bush name, that gives you the name recognition, and it's important to really take these polls and put them in perspective.
Yeah.
People are being asked, they're given like 6 names, they can't really recognize 4 of them, right? They recognize Bush,
right,
and they say, oh yeah, Bush. That's why Mitt Romney is in the head of polls when his name is included.
People just know the name.
So, and that is very helpful because then that gets the people writing checks to say, okay, this guy's got it, right? The media sees, oh, wow, he's got this huge war chest, he's up in the polls. It gets good press, that it becomes this cycle where, all these sort of boats rise for the candidate. So it's very helpful to have that name recognition, but it doesn't get you the nomination. You still got to fight it out in the end.
But it gets you in the game.
It gets you. It puts you in the front of the game.
Right.
But let's keep in mind, and at this time before the 2008 election, Rudy Giuliani was leading in the Republican polls. So you really can't look at it right now and say, okay, Jeb Bush is up. It's his race.
Right, and I think there's something to be said about just being famous. Fred Thompson had this issue in 2008. We saw this. I mean, Mike Huckabee right now probably be near the top just because of his Fox News show. I mean, there are people who are popular, but then there are people who actually create dynasties, right? I mean, because if we were to look, for example, and I want to go back to Roosevelt in a moment, but if we were to look, for example, at the Kennedys, and I think I have if we the Kennedys.
Nice.
And I looked at this basic map of the Kennedys here, and you see the Kennedys have produced one president, but if you look at Patrick Kennedy, Massachusetts State Rep, Massachusetts State Senator, John Fitzgerald, who has a daughter, Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy, who's the daughter of the Boston mayor. Joseph P. Kennedy becomes U.S. ambassador to the U.K. And then we go down, you have Ted Kennedy, who becomes the U.S. senator, obviously before he passed away. John F. Kennedy, you had Bobby Kennedy, who was the attorney general and may have been another U.S. president had he not been killed.
Yeah.
You had Gene Kennedy, who was an ambassador to Ireland. And we going down. Then you had the Shrivers to that, which begets Shrivers and Schwarzeneggers who marry in. And before you know it, you have this entire amalgam of political leadership that comes out of this. No one would be shocked if Chelsea Clinton became a U.S. senator. I think, in fact, we're all kind of waiting for it.
We are expecting that.
And Bill Clinton produced Hillary Clinton partly, not just the first lady, but again, a sitting U.S. senator. We see the fruits of this dynasty already, irrespective of whether or not she wins a presidential election. Same thing with the Bushes, right? We've had multiple governors, we've had 2 presidents. They're doing pretty good work here.
Jeb's son right now is making his move in Texas.
Exactly. So I say that to say there seems to be a rich sort of political dynasty for some folk, you know what I mean? And it's partially rooted in money, it's partially rooted in fame, but I feel like there's something else here that's going on, which is why I go back to Roosevelt and others.
Well, I think that there is, if you even look at European history, right?
Yeah.
That notion that there are these families that we trust. And they may not be worthy of our trust, but they've been around for a while. We know what we got with them, so we trust them. And this was something antithetical to the American Republic. And even when John Quincy Adams was running for president, he was being accused of being part of a dynasty.
Right.
And by the way, he lost that election. He lost the popular vote, and he lost the Electoral College, and it got thrown to the House of Representatives in 1824, and should have lost to Andrew Jackson. George W. Bush, right? Many people say lost in 2000. So, the American public, yes, we embrace a dynasty, but we'll stop it from going too far,
Exactly. Nicole, historically, what has been the thing that makes voters say, you know what, we've had enough?
Oh, it's a good question. I think that, especially in the case of the Kennedys, voters would have been pretty happy to have a number of Kennedys in the White House. They were pretty much brought down by a mix of tragedy and scandal rather than being put up before the voters. I do think you will see some resistance to this idea of dynastic politics when it comes to 2016, which is why, if you have both Jeb and Hillary Clinton, then it becomes this issue where you don't really have a choice. You're going to choose one dynasty or the other. I think, though, that would be a moment that would cause Americans to step back and reflect at where our politics have landed. It's a combination of money, but it's also the combination of connections and name recognition and the weakening of the party system that gives them so much power today, I think.
Jeannie, is it also that people see the next member of the dynasty as a proxy for the first one that they liked? I mean, because that's what fascinates me about the Bush dynasty, right? Many people loved Bill Clinton, even with the sex scandals and everything else. People liked many dimensions of the Clinton administration. And so for many people, Hillary Clinton is an extension of the Clinton administration minus the sex scandal. When Al Gore ran and lost, and for whatever reason, many people said he should have pushed harder on being a third term of Bill Clinton. The reason it was very difficult for anyone to follow George W. Bush was because people said they didn't want a third term of Bush because his polls were so low. His father was not reelected. So it seems to me that each Bush that comes in some ways has done less well than the one before him, and at least in terms of polls and popularity rankings. Why would voters keep voting for someone who there's no empirical evidence to suggest did better?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is going to be the big challenge, actually, for Jeb going forward, because I agree that, the brand, the money, the connections get you in the door, but you have to knock open the door, and then once you get in there, you have to stay there. And one of Jeb's big problems is his brother, quite frankly. He has to deal with some of these issues that were raised under his brother and very unpopular. Just as an example, last week we saw the torture memo released, the torture report. Jeb has been talking a lot about transparency and releasing these emails, and yet he hasn't been so transparent on where he stands on that issue. And that's certainly going to be one of the many kind of Bush issues that follow Jeb. So I do think it's going to be a problem. And I think, quite frankly, if you compare, as you mentioned, Marc, the Bush brand to the Clinton brand, more people would want to go back, if they want to go back at all, to the 90s than would want to go back to the 2000s. So I think Hillary, if it's a Hillary, and this is way too early to say this, but a Hillary versus Jeb kind of race, she might have an advantage there. So, I do think people think about those things. But, part of the problem here is the way that we run our elections. In our election cycle, connections, money, name recognition matter an awful lot. So these people get to the top because people have a sense as to who they are, and then people have a chance to judge them. But the problem, as somebody mentioned earlier, is that people who aren't connected and don't have a lot of money but may have great ideas can't rise in this type of system because our party structure is weak and there's no real way to do that. So it's a real problem.
Absolutely. Another person whose voice may become part of the political conversation is Barbara Bush, because last year, George H.W. Bush, his wife, Barbara, former First Lady, was asked about the prospect of her son, Jeb, running for president. She said this.
He's by far the best qualified man, but no, I really don't. I think it's a great country. There are a lot of great families, and it's not just for families or whatever. There are other people out there that are very qualified, and we've had enough Bushes.
Now, that's something you say, I'm assuming, Jeannie, is it fair to say this is something you say when you think your son isn't running for president?
I think, yeah, and then she kind of tried to walk it back later, as you know. So, yeah, if I ever said that about my sons, they'd kill me. So, It's not the kind of thing you want your mother to say on air live. But, yeah, she tried to walk that back a little bit. But, I think she really reflected the sentiments of many Americans who feel like, gosh, aren't there more than 3 or 4 families who can do this job and who can serve the American public? So it was fascinating, and we all know that Barbara Bush, bless her heart, has always spoken her mind, and she did it that time.
Yeah, and I think Democrats will be using that clip for many, many, many months to come. At least the next 24 months will be filled with that clip. But speaking of many Americans, there was a 2008 New York Times CBS poll, and Americans were asked how they felt about the 2 decades of Bush-Clinton White Houses. Whether it was a good thing for the country, quote, because the individuals in these families have a lot of experience in government and politics, or whether it was a bad thing for the country because it concentrates too much power among a small group of people, or if it didn't make much difference because each election is about individuals, not families. Well, 5% said that it was a good thing. 38% said it was a bad thing. And 50%, I call those my treasured cynics, say it makes no difference at all. David, Americans don't seem to think it's a good thing. Barbara Bush doesn't seem to think it's a good thing. But Hillary Clinton seems to be an unavoidable, immovable force at this point.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't think it was a good thing in 2008, and I think that was a reflection of George W. Bush, right? And I think that Jeb Bush is going to have big trouble, not only if he makes it to the general election, which I don't think he will.
This is a big if.
But if he, when he faces off against the Tea Party guys who hated the Bushes, Rand Paul, they had a big problem with the spending that happened. The wars in the case of Rand Paul. So he's going to have big trouble with the Bush brand.
Yeah, a big trouble. But again, if Hillary's unavoidable, and let's just...
Hillary's unavoidable, we can say that.
And it has as much to do with the pool as it does with her, right? And let's say, and you can make a similar argument for Jeb Bush. It's not nearly as clear cut. I mean, there are some people there who are going to push back. Rand Paul,
He's got tremendous trouble.
Chris Christie, if he ever gets his life right.
John Kasich, don't forget about him. He's going to be
John's an interesting one.
Yes.
And I know John very, very well. He's in a great state. Prime position.
Ohio, which he won by 30 points,
yes.
Right? He kind of takes it off the table if he gets that nomination. If I were in the Hillary camp, I'd be scared of that guy.
John's not a great campaigner, and he's not super bright. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that he makes.
Hey, look, we've seen that happen before in Republican Party nomination politics.
Perhaps. But I guess my point is, if we just at least indulge me for a moment and say that Clinton-Bush happens, Clinton-Bush 2 happens, or whatever. How does an American public deal with this? Do we see a third-party candidate rise up? No. I'm not saying and win, but I mean really be a significant spoiler, a la Ralph Nader, a la Ross Perot. Yeah. Do we see a significant spoiler? Do we see mass disillusionment? People don't come to the polls anymore, which could have enormous impact on the Congress, depending on who actually does come out. Typically, the activists come out.
Yeah.
How does this change elections if people are really this tired and fatigued of dynasties, but they have an unavoidable dynasty on the top of the ticket?
Yeah, I could see that because there is so much discontent with the Bush legacy on the right of the Republican Party. I could see, a kind of Pat Buchanan, pitchfork and firebrand, independent party move, which would, of course, be devastating to the Republican Party.
Absolutely.
That is going to be something they're going to have to be really concerned about if it does look like Jeb is going to win that nomination.
Absolutely. Jeannie, what do you say? If we're faced with a dynasty in November of 2016, what do we do with it?
I don't want to be cynical here, but I think I'm going to join your cynical group and say, I think Americans, when they're asked in polls, do they mind the dynasties? They say, yeah. But in practice, I don't think it's going to matter. I think they're going to judge the candidates on their merits. So I think they will judge Hillary Clinton and Jeb Bush if they're the candidates on their merits. And quite frankly, turnout will be as dismal as it's been, fairly recently, excepting 2008. So you may get some people who don't turn out, but I think it's going to be along those lines. And I would just say, not only does Jeb Bush potentially have a problem on his right, but Hillary Clinton has an increasing problem on her left. And I think we can't forget that. And if the Republicans were smart, I think they would put up somebody who speaks for the middle class, because Elizabeth Warren has shown that's how you can beat Hillary Clinton. And yet, if they put up Jeb Bush, they are making a really smooth transition for Hillary Clinton, because they take off the table all those things that people find questionable about her. And so I think the Republicans would be making a big mistake.
I don't know if there are any Republican candidates right now who can do the opposite of that, right? I mean, I don't know if there's, I don't know any Republican candidates that are speaking to the middle class in ways that would compromise Hillary Clinton's progressive bona fides. And I don't consider Hillary Clinton particularly progressive, but I'm just saying from the right, I don't see that happening. I think the best challenge she would get would be in a primary from Elizabeth Warren, who has said with an exclamation point this week that she is not running. Nicole, what say you?
Well, I would love to think that if Americans felt like they had two unappealing choices, it might lead them to wonder why the political system was giving them choices that they didn't want, and maybe that would lead them down the road to finance reform and things like that. But I also share this cynicism that says they might want that, but actually that leading to political change. The political system has been pretty difficult to change of late. So I share some of that cynicism, but I'm hopeful that if those were the choices, that would open a broader conversation about why our politics isn't reflecting what we really want.
Exactly. And I'd love to figure out what it is we really want, because quite frankly, I don't know either. Anyway, Nicole, Jeannie, David, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks.
All right. Stay with us here at HuffPo Live. Much more coming up.